Plan for America podcast is a show dedicated to national unity through prosperity that's achieved by free market capitalism. We believe that a rising tide does lift all boats. This show will be positive, solution-oriented, and nonpartisan. Our only agenda is for the prosperity of our country and her people. All are welcome here. This show will not be argumentative or incendiary, sensational, or polarizing and divisive. What we are presenting is a positive solution to one of America's greatest problems. Hello and welcome to Plan for America podcast. I'm your host, Eric Nager, and my guest today is Dr. Daniel Hall, who is the Dean of the Earl Phillips College of Business at High Point University in North Carolina. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you, Eric Nager, for having me. And I'm proud to be part of this podcast series.
Well, we're glad to have you. And if you could please start off by introducing yourself to our audience. Tell us about your educational background and your career up to this point, please.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'm an economist, and I started out as a first-generation college student in Milledgeville, Georgia. Go Bobcats, Georgia College State University. And then I didn't do enough to get a good job, and so I decided to go and become a college professor. And I went to downtown Atlanta for Georgia State University, go Panthers. And so I went through the process of getting my PhD with fields in environmental economics and experimental economics. And then I hit the job market, also known as the running of the economists, because we're running across different hotels. I was blessed and fortunate enough that my first interview was with High Point University, and I was High Point University's first interview. So it was love at first sight. And from day one word sums it up, and that's flourishing. I felt a sense of flourishing as I went through each year, taking on new preps, from teaching principles courses to environmental economics, to service learning courses, to becoming the inaugural chair of the Department of Economics, and more recently becoming the Dean of the Phillips School of Business, where I have the opportunity to help all 1566 majors transform themselves and flourish. And so the joy is when I come back and I see alumni. I was actually in Charlotte for our Day for HPU, and I raised my hand. I said, how many of the 45 people in the audience had a class with Dr. Hall? And I had about a dozen raise their hand, and it was like a little reunion just for me, and it was so nice. Just greatest job in the world.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you like it so much. And tell us a little more about High Point. I think some people may have heard of Dr. Nito Cobain, who is the president of the school. He's pretty well known, and it seems that High Point has done some remarkable things. But tell us about Dr. Cobain and the transformation of High Point University.
Certainly. So I came to High Point University in 2010. Dr. Cobain, who was on the board of trustees, he thought he was going to get to be appointed the board chairman, or maybe he was already. But then they said, our university isn't doing so good. We're not flourishing. They didn't use those terms, but they were really down in the dumps by all financial indicators, much what a lot of universities are facing today, unfortunately. And so, driven by faithful courage, Dr. Cobain continues to lead High Point University through an extraordinary transformation. Since 2005, undergraduate enrollment and graduate enrollment total combined together has increased by 250%. We've had a 394% increase in staff and faculty positions, and a 449% increase in campus acreage. We went from 3 schools to essentially a baker's dozen right now. And we keep continuing to move up in the ranks as we started offering doctoral programs. So when I came in 2010, I was like, oh man, I missed all the transformational and exponential growth. Boy, did he not disappoint. every other year, we got a new program or a new building coming up, and I got a new group of people I can connect my students to help them flourish. So it's really cool. It's great to be part of something that's growing and it's exciting. And I really believe in our brand promise. This is my business card, but on the back of every business card, it says at High Point University, every student receives an extraordinary education, inspiring environment with caring people. And so it's those values, those principles that keep us focused on what's most important, and that's the student. And so through those fundamentals and the business knowledge and entrepreneurial mindset and growth mindset that comes from the energy from the president, Dr. Cobain, who's also an inspirational speaker and has many accolades. We don't have enough time on this podcast to even go through, but he's also one of the longest serving members of Truist Bank, which is definitely one of the more conservative, more free market oriented, and more principle-based leadership organizations out there. Next week, my business students who are in the Business Fellows program are going to go through the Truist Emerging Leaders program. And this was actually started by BB&T Bank and is a continued tradition after the merger with SunTrust. And so we have a lot to be proud of here. We have a long list of friends that Dr. Cobain has made over the years through his consulting and professional speaking career that now brings it to campus. And so you think about how much money your business right now is probably paying for a professional speaker, and we get one like every other day. Or it's like I felt flourishing partly because I feel like I've been on a 13-year business retreat. So
Yeah. Well, I'd like to unpeel that a little more because I've heard Dr. Cobain speak. He is very inspiring. You cited some of the statistics about how the school has grown, the physical plant, the number of enrollees, but there's obviously something behind that that's drawing people there. High Point bills itself as the premier life skills university. And one of the things that I think High Point is known for is world-class internships, real-world experience that the students get while they're students. Can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Definitely. So we are the premier life skills university. We are the premier life skills and leadership university. I've heard that say a couple times. Our values are entrepreneurial mindset, growth mindset, transformational change. I would add to it something I'm borrowing from one of Dr. Cobain's friends, Daniel Burris, and that is we have an anticipatory mindset, or in the words of Wayne Gretzky, we're skating to where the puck is going to be. And I can't speak for the other schools as much as I can for my own. So would it be okay if I just kind of gave an example of how we do this in the school business? Because
all of our other schools
do it their own unique way.
Yeah. But like, where have you placed some of your graduates, for example? That might be interesting.
Oh, yes. Let me just grab one of the open house flyers I've been passing around here, because we just did freshman orientation. So I just welcomed 4 groups today. So this is our business one-pager, and internships, ADP, Ashley Furniture, AT&T, Bedgear, Booz Allen Hamilton, Bristol Myers Squibb, Cisco Systems, Cogent Analytics. We just honored one of our students under 40 with the Triad Business Journal. Hey, Caleb Connerty. Then we got Deloitte, Deutsche Bank, Ernst & Young, Global Limited, Gartner, where we've employed for internships and careers over 100 students at Gartner. This is the world's leading independent research that does fields of IT, healthcare, supply chain, some of those 3 fast-growing fields: GE, Johnson Controls, KPMG LP, Mack Trucks, Merrill Lynch Wealth, Morgan Stanley, PwC, Qualcomm, Seed Software, UBS Wealth Management, Volvo Group. Those are just internships. Placements, I'm trying to look at the ones that weren't already listed. So we got Coca-Cola, Cone Health, Datto, DHG, GE Healthcare, Johnson & Johnson, Kellogg, Lenovo, Liberty Mutual, Lakeland Financial, Merrill Lynch, JP Morgan Chase, Qualcomm Tech Systems, Tempur Sealy, Vanguard, and Walt Disney, and Yelp.
To name a few.
Just to name a few, and we are at 99% placement within 6 months of graduation. By placement, we mean that they have a full-time job or they picked a graduate school of their choice. And that is basically 16 points higher than the NACE average. And that's the National Association of Colleges and Employers. So it's an independent party that shows that we're 16 points higher than the national average, because on the business agenda that we have for all of our meetings, we say 100% placement. It's everyone's business. Our operative words are intentional, relevant, and systematic. We're intentional in the sense that we put as many career readiness and experiential learning opportunities into our classes. So it's automatically, it's assigned. So even if we get the least motivated students here at High Point University, which is harder and harder to get these days because we're becoming more and more exclusive, we still get them ready. We bring them to the water again and again and again, and that horse will start drinking eventually. So, yeah, and so I like to teach in analogies a lot. So, yeah. So, anyways, or metaphors, that is. So we got that. So, career readiness and experiential learning opportunities. That's the intentionality. The relevant side, that's the anticipatory mindset. We're skating where the puck is going to be. I'm getting our students ready for the fact that every business will be a digital business, no matter what size, by the time they graduate. And the first thing that I did when I stepped into this role, I said, every student is going to take an Excel course by the end of their freshman year called Practical Excel for Business. And it's a crash course. It's only one of credit, whereas our normal courses are 4. And what they do is they learn the fundamentals, and they learn enough, if they're paying attention, to pass the Excel Associate exam. So then they actually get to send a third-party signal for that first freshman and sophomore internship that they actually do know Excel, and they're not just making it up.
That's great. I'm sure you could cite many more examples. I did want to cover that stat. I thought it was 98%. You're telling me now it's 99% of all the
Yeah, we have to
graduates.
keep updating the website. I mean, I think for the university as a whole, we're rounding up, but for the school of business, it's definitely above 99%.
Okay. School of Business. Well, there you go. Well, that's great. Well, before we get to the break, I wanted to ask you, shifting gears now, as an economist yourself, you were telling me that you have a list of criteria by which you evaluate any type of program, say, for example, like the entitlement programs and Plan for America we're going to talk about in the second half. Could you just give us maybe a list of the criteria you look at? And you're going to share your screen.
Yes, right. Can you see it?
I can.
All right. So what you're seeing here is a report card that I use when I teach environmental economics. So an environment is really just a system, and a system has various institutions. Those various institutions has rules of the game. Those rules of the game create incentives. Those incentives reallocate resources. And if they're done right, it leads to flourishing, economic growth, prosperity. But if you have misalignment at any point along that stage, you're not going to reach your full potential. You might even be unsustainable. You might be apocalyptical. Which got me interested in what you're doing here in Plan for America, because we'll
leave that as a teaser here. We'll take a break here, and then we'll be right back with Dr. Daniel Hall on Plan for America podcast. If you like what you're hearing and want to learn more about Plan for America, visit our website at www.planforamerica.us. There's an extensive Q&A section there, and if you don't see a question you have, then please ask us by email. You can order our book, Plan for America: How to Place the American Dream on a Sure Foundation Forever. That can be found on Amazon.com. You can like us on Facebook, And if you really like what you're hearing, you're welcome to contribute through our website. Plan for America is a nonprofit 501c3 organization, and all contributions are tax deductible. And we're back on Plan for America podcast. I'm your host, Eric Nager. Our guest is Dr. Daniel Hall, the Dean of the Phillips School of Business at High Point University in North Carolina.
Go Panthers.
It's a beautiful campus. I've actually been there. I visited it.
Big time.
It's quite a place. And what we were talking about right before the break is that Dr. Hall, as an economist, has a list of criteria by which he evaluates really any type of program. And today we want to evaluate the current entitlement, Social Security, Medicare, versus Plan for America. Your first criteria is efficiency. What does that mean, and how do you evaluate the current program?
Sure, I'm just sharing my screen. All right, so let's skip to there. All right, so efficiency is the gold standard for economists. You know, we want to maximize the distance between total benefits and total costs of whatever it is. And so if you've maximized the net benefits, then you are efficient. You've made the pie as big as possible in that particular period of time. Now we can go into details about, you know, static efficiency versus dynamic efficiency, but let's just keep it simple. If we have a report card, I'm giving the current system status quo an F on this because government has no competition that encourages low cost. And they don't have the incentive nor the ability to acquire the knowledge to know what outcome would create the greatest benefits. And just by looking at a glance at our unfunded liabilities, if you go to the Congressional Budget Office, if you want to lose sleep, you can go look at it, and an efficient program should be able to pay for itself, and it is not.
Not by a long shot.
Not by a long shot. And for Plan for America, one of the features that really stuck out to me was the management fee that assures that even in bad years, the fund can outperform what currently Social Security offers in terms of the retirement piece of Plan for America.
And just to amplify that,
yes, you want to add some stuff
amplify that. It's the Plan for America offers a guaranteed minimum return.
You can even get that.
So it's market returns in up years, and then in down years, it's a guaranteed minimum return. The management fee just kind of underpins that because it gives the plan, the trust, if you will, a cash flow against which it can float bonds, it can borrow money, and the public-private partnership of this aspect is that the U.S. government agrees to pay the interest on the bonds and guarantees the bonds.
Wow.
But the cash flow generated by the bonds gives every participant a guaranteed minimum return to tide over in down years, and then of course they pay back the loans and get the actual market returns in the up years. So I think it is more efficient. I would agree with you. That's just a little amplification of it. So let's move on to sustainability. What do you mean by that? Well,
you know, sustainability is probably the most overused word next to intentional these days. And so what we mean by sustainability economics is to not make future generations worse off than current generations. So if you think about the production possibilities frontier, what's possible, economic growth shifts it in, economic growth shifts it out, lack of sustainability shifts it in. And so the trade-offs are worse in the long run. So these unfunded liabilities have to be funded at some point. They're funded by cuts. They're funded by a reduction in benefits. And the net interest paid on these unfunded liabilities is ballooning. And as it does so, it starts to create a burden that slows the economy. And you've seen it in other countries, and they say never America because we're the world's largest economy, but never say never. Always question, is this sustainable? So I give it an.
And with Plan for America, because the retirement accounts are funded by your own money, basically the payroll tax is a 15.3% that's currently going to these programs. Instead, for those who opt into the program, that 15.3% payroll tax would be set aside into a fund or into an account in your own name.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it would be very sustainable because it would be funded by your own money over time. You'd be self-funding it instead of a pay-as-you-go system whereby the current workers pay for the retired generation, which is almost like a Ponzi scheme, given our demographics. And so this way it becomes sustainable because the only thing is there's a transition period whereby the current retirees, the promises have to be made, have to be kept to them so that they get the retirement they were promised. And that's where Plan for America, again, can borrow money to do that. But once those retirees are paid off, then from then on, it's completely self-sustaining. All right, let's look at your next criteria.
Sure. I'll just say one quick thing about that's fascinating because in environmental economics, we talk about sustainability. You say, like, at what point do we switch to greener methods before the apocalypse hits? And so you could use that same analogy when you talk about switching from what we currently have to what you propose. It's going to be costly to have a transition.
Yes,
but it's going to be more sustainable in the long run.
But we come with it with a funding mechanism, so that's the good news. Let's talk about cost effectiveness.
Yeah. So what cost effectiveness is like the little sister of efficiency in a way, and such that it's not so like efficiency means you're doing the right things the right way. The cost effectiveness is just saying you're just doing things the right way. Whatever it is you're doing, you're minimizing the total cost of doing it. And so what that means is that you're going to allocate resources across different parties in a way that minimizes the total cost. And is there an incentive under Social Security to get those costs down for Medicare, for Medicaid? What type of mechanism exists to make sure that that happens? In competition, it's pretty easy because under perfect competition, prices are driven down to costs. And if you are not the lowest cost seller, you're going to be sub-marginal, meaning that your cost will exceed the market price. And so what automatically happens is that prices allocate. It's Adam Smith's invisible hand.
Right.
It allocates resources in a way that minimizes costs. And in environmental economics, the tools that are most cost effective are the incentive-based ones that charge a price on carbon or whatever pollutant you're trying to regulate. Or they establish property rights and they allow people to freely trade those property rights over what supposed market failures have, but really it's just an incompleteness of markets. And so that was a lesson from Ronald Coase in that sense. But I'm rambling here, but there's no evidence of any incentive for these institutions to lower cost producers and have them serve the highest value buyer. So there's no evidence that there's a bang for the buck allocation here.
Right. And we're completely relying on the free markets here. On the retirement side, the participants would be invested in an all market index of U.S. domiciled publicly traded corporations.
Yep.
So we could bid out to big firms like Vanguard, like BlackRock to administer the index. I mean, they might charge a single basis point for a fund of this size. I mean, we're talking about $1 trillion going in every year from the payroll taxes. So it would cost virtually nothing to administer that. And then on the healthcare side, there's great market incentives we have built in there to mitigate against the spiraling costs of healthcare. True competition, complete portability, no pre-existing conditions, many of the things that are
Mhm.
already there, except that it would be single payer, but it would be private single payer, and
Mm.
insurance companies would be competing amongst themselves to offer plans. So, but while we're going on this, let's talk about incentives that go beyond the standard.
Yeah. So an example of this for when in case of environmental economics, say we have this regulation that you have to install some type of smokestack scrubber. Well, once you're compliant, you spend enough money on that smokestack scrubber, and there's no incentive to reduce your pollution by any more than that. There's no incentive to buy any more equipment. Um, and and so in the case of Medicare, Medicaid, often you're getting the same amounts, except for when there's claims, of course, but
Yes.
like regular checkups, you're kind of getting the same amount whether you're healthy or sick. I mean, there's no incentives to really get healthier, to go beyond the standard, because you don't get to keep the savings of what you have there. Now, I mean, there are copays to some degree, but it's just not, there's no teeth in it, especially when there's in healthcare overall, there's no price transparency. But
Right.
that's a topic for another time, right?
Right. Well, we have an answer to that too. And Plan for America, every healthcare premium
Mm-hmm.
includes a $1,200 HSA or health savings account that is guaranteed to cover all deductibles and copays for the policyholder throughout the year. And any portion of the health savings account that is not used in a given year is returned to the participant tax-free at the end of the year. So there's incentive to have preventive care, to take care of yourself, wellness checks, all that kind of stuff, and marshal and preserve your healthcare dollars, because
Mm-hmm.
you get some of it back at the end of the year if they're not used.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just one example.
Yeah,
It's in the interest of time, let's move on to the next
sure.
criteria, please. Are these the last two coming up?
We actually have three. I'm going to read one before I show the next slide because I don't want to spoil the other two.
Okay.
So fairness is the other thing that we get a really good report card on Plan for America, and what we currently have is not fair at all.
It really isn't, because the young people are paying for the older generations, and there won't be anything left for them at the
Yeah.
current pace. So
So
let's go. Yeah.
I gave it an F alone from the PAYGO system, where basically
Okay.
current money pays current retirees. The first person who contributed to Social Security was a net recipient
That's
of
right.
a couple $40,000, like, which was a lot of money back then. And now we're all net payers because it's an unsustainable
That's
system.
right. That's right. It's not
So
fair.
that is not fair.
All right.
Most
Let's look
people
at the
say no to that.
last two.
Yep.
The last two.
So you're probably wondering, like, why aren't we already doing this? And that's where these last two ones kind of say, well, here's part of the reason why.
Moral precepts.
Moral precepts. Feels right to give all some access, but it also doesn't feel right to pass the buck to future generations. When things are simple, they tend to kind of, or it's what people know, there's this kind of cognitive bias or idea that, like, anything that's different feels like a violation of what their morals are. So because it's familiar, I gave it a little bit higher on the moral precepts. Just say, like, and I'm not saying like this is the moral thing to do. I'm saying like these are how people grade these policies. But in terms of Plan for America, so if you believe it's right to keep what you earn, and that is your principal moral guide, then you get an A for Plan for America.
Well, another aspect of it is in Social Security, when you and your spouse pass, Social Security payments stop. Under Plan for America, the income that you trigger when you retire for yourself can flow to your heirs in perpetuity. So there's no end to it because it's ultimately your money. So that's another aspect of a moral precept, I think, that you can pass the cash flow along to your heirs or charitable cause, whatever the case may be, continually, well beyond your lifetime. All right, let's talk about the last one. This is where the one place where the current system gets a better grade, political feasibility.
So if this is such a good idea, why aren't we doing it? Is what some might say, and that's where political feasibility, the status quo, almost always gets the A, because it's easier to stick with the devil you know, because people are risk averse and they're busy and they don't have the incentive to study policies that have concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. So a few people benefit from the current status quo significantly, and those who don't do so, those costs are spread out, but their collective bargaining power in this sense it's hard to overcome. So like you basically, if you're going to fight the status quo, you're doing it out of, not your self-interest, you're doing it out of principle or your self-interest and future generations. Because otherwise, if you're just myopic, it's just not worth it to try to fight it. So you really have to think about your principles there. Also, that's a big obstacle. Are you familiar with the bootleggers and Baptist story?
What, some Baptists were bootleggers?
Well, I'll explain it. And we should definitely put a link to it in the show notes. I think it's something very important for Plan for America to consider as they promote their ideas, because when you have regulations and policies that have bootleggers and Baptist scenarios, they tend to stick around. So if you think about in the 1920s when demon rum was illegal, Baptists got prohibition enacted because they thought it was the devil. So you have a moral precept that pushes for a policy. And then you have the bootleggers who are like, if you've ever seen Boardwalk Empire, when they ban alcohol, all the gangsters like, we're gonna be rich. And so those bootleggers benefited from the Baptist and morally enacted regulation. And those bootleggers have the money to influence politicians who respond to concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. And so if you have a bootleggers and Baptist situation, it's very hard to change and do some political feasibility for something new.
That's a great point. We kind of do have that situation. The only point I would make for our big government friends is that there still is a role for government to play in Plan for America. It is truly a public-private partnership. It's not simply or only a privatization, and government is completely out of the picture. So that's the only comment I would add there. Daniel, we're about out of time. Is there anything else you'd like to add about Plan for America or this analysis or anything like that?
Well, I think what y'all are doing is bold. I think it has definitely some potential. But more people need to be aware of what's being offered. And so I'm proud to be part of this podcast and to get people to think a little bit outside the box, because that's what we like to do at High Point University.
Well, thank you for being our guest, Dr. Daniel Hall. And join us again for another edition of Plan for America podcast. If you like what you're hearing and want to learn more about Plan for America, visit our website at www.planforamerica.us. There's an extensive Q&A section there. And if you don't see a question you have, then please ask us by email. You can order our book, Plan for America, How to Place the American Dream on a Sure Foundation Forever. That can be found on Amazon.com. You can like us on Facebook. And if you really like what you're hearing, you're welcome to contribute through our website. Plan for America is a nonprofit 501c3 organization, and all contributions are tax deductible.